All right. So if you've been kind of following the whole situation in Ukraine, I mean, wondering about what role sanctions play. I think today is really an interesting deep dive because we're going to be looking at the potential of the U.S. to lift sanctions on Russia, and we've got some really fascinating stuff here that kind of looks at all the complex factors that are driving this potential shift, and then also kind of the timeline of events, and then of course potential consequences.
Yeah.
Huge sanctions imposed by the U.S., EU, and G7 right after that full-on invasion of Ukraine back in 2022.
Right.
Those were all aimed at really crippling Russia's economy.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They're pretty sweeping
Yeah.
in terms of targeting financial institutions, and really critical
So,
exports.
and yet,
Nickel.
even though all this was done, and we've seen even more intensified military actions from Russia in Ukraine, early this year, 2025. This conflict is really, really dug in.
Yeah, it's a stalemate now.
Yeah, it's protracted, and it really seems like that's one of the main reasons why there's a reevaluation going on.
It makes sense.
Yeah, so our goal today is really to try to understand, what are the key reasons why there's this potential lifting of sanctions.
Right.
We want to look at all the different perspectives, and then of course what it could mean for
For the future.
for the future. I mean, what are the core arguments even for considering lifting sanctions at this point?
Well, I think our sources point to the fact that the main driver really is this push to find a way to resolve the war in Ukraine.
Right.
It's been 4 years now.
Yeah.
And while sanctions have caused pretty significant economic hardship for Russia, when we saw their GDP shrink in 2022, incredibly high interest rates, 21% was the peak in 2025.
Oh my God.
And the cost of their national debt has just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
But they haven't retreated.
They have not.
They haven't backed down.
And it's interesting this word resilience keeps popping up.
Right.
As I'm reading through this material.
Yeah.
They seem to be turning towards places like China and India for trade. They're creating what's being called this kind of wartime economy,
Right.
and even using this shadow fleet of tankers
Yeah.
to try to move oil around.
Sure. Fit around the restrictions. Yeah.
So the sanctions were meant to hurt, and they did hurt, but they didn't achieve the goal of getting them to retreat.
Right.
And so it kind of makes sense that there's this strategic rethink.
Yeah.
And it seems that President Trump, since he's taken office in January of this year, 2025, is looking at this from a very different perspective.
Yeah. He seems to be.
Yeah.
It seems his viewpoint is that he wants to leverage the sanctions relief as a way to get Russia to the negotiating table.
Right.
To start talking about a ceasefire. His priority seems to be to end the war quickly, which he sees as a distraction from other things that he thinks are more important for the U.S. to be focused on.
Yeah, and he's definitely engaged, directly with Putin. We've
Right.
seen, like a phone call back in February, and then some meetings in Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So.
Right. And remember that Truth Social post
Oh yeah.
back in March 7th?
Yeah.
Where he talked about imposing these massive banking sanctions
Yeah.
if a peace deal wasn't reached.
Yeah. So there's this like.
So it's this kind of pressure inducement kind of strategy.
Yeah.
Hit him with the stick and dangle the carrot
Yeah. To try to.
in order to get things moving.
Yeah, to catalyze some action there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then there were these reports in March as well that the White House had tasked both the state and Treasury departments with actually exploring the easing of sanctions
Right.
on specific Russians and firms, especially oligarchs,
Oligarchs, yeah.
to get them to negotiate.
Yeah, to use as bargaining chips, I guess.
Yeah, so it's really a shift.
Yeah, it's a real shift.
From just punishment to trying to broker some kind of deal.
Right.
Yeah, and reportedly even Trump has said, in the Oval Office, that he believes that Putin is more open to peace talks
Interesting.
than the leaders of Ukraine.
Wow.
So that's kind of a
that's true.
that's a pretty significant perspective shaping this potential policy adjustment.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the
the
some
geopolitical
geopolitical stuff, right?
Right.
There's some real big economic
imperatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to look at the big picture here.
Yeah.
And when you do, you realize that Russia is still a major player in the global economy.
Right.
I mean, they supply a lot of things that are essential.
Mm-hmm.
Oil, natural gas, wheat fertilizer, rare earth metals.
Yeah. And these
And,
sanctions.
right.
Yeah.
And the thing is,
Yeah.
these sanctions that were meant to hurt Russia, they haven't operated in a vacuum.
Right.
They've had ripple effects
Yeah.
on the U.S. and its allies as well.
Yeah. We saw that especially with energy prices.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember back in December 2022, the G7 tried to cap Russian oil prices at $60 a barrel?
Yeah.
That was to try to, like, cut into their profits.
Reduce the revenue, yeah.
But it looks like that hasn't really worked.
Yeah. Not as well as they hoped.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is how quickly people find workarounds
Yeah.
in the global marketplace.
Yeah.
There's still sales happening
Yeah.
above that $60 cap
Right.
to countries like India and China.
Right.
So it's created volatility in the energy market. And of course, that translates into
Yeah.
problems at home
Yeah.
for the Trump administration.
Yeah. I mean, keeping fuel costs down is a huge
Is a major
concern.
Yeah. So there's this argument being made that, hey, if we ease up on sanctions in the energy sector, boosts the supply, stabilize prices.
Yeah. And especially if we can, maybe tighten up on Iranian oil exports,
Right.
which Treasury Secretary Bessent spoke about in February,
Yeah.
talking about that immediate maximal effect on the global oil market.
Well, it's kind of a recalibration
Yeah.
of the sanctions, using them more strategically
Yeah.
to achieve specific economic goals for the U.S.
Yeah. Okay. And then there's the food security issue.
Oh, right.
I mean, Russia is a major player when it comes to agriculture.
Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the top exporter of both wheat and fertilizer globally.
Yeah. Wow.
And you see that being highlighted in the expos from late March.
Yeah.
And also there's some discussions about bringing Russia back into the SWIFT system and back into the world markets.
Yeah, and this is really important because, when you disrupt those supply chains because of sanctions, you get food inflation, you get shortages.
Right.
It hits American consumers in the pocketbook.
Yeah, and that puts pressure on lawmakers.
Yeah, so easing the restrictions could actually be seen as aligning with, Trump's America First focus.
Putting domestic economic well-being ahead of, keeping the screws on Russia.
Yeah, in certain sectors.
In those particular areas.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got, we want to see the war and we've got these huge economic pressures.
Right.
But then there's also this geopolitical.
Yeah, the reshaping of these relationships on the global stage.
Yeah.
This is important to think about in terms of the long-term strategic implications of the sanctions the way they are now. I mean, the Biden administration put in place something like 6,000 sanctions since that invasion back in 2022.
Yeah.
And those have definitely deepened this animosity between the U.S. and Russia. But one outcome has been that it's driven Russia closer to China and Iran.
Yeah, this is a real challenge.
And this emerging bloc,
this
is a major challenge to U.S. influence globally.
Yeah.
We've seen China step up, to provide technological and trade support to Russia.
Yeah.
And they're increasingly using their own currencies for trade.
Yeah. 90% of their transactions in rubles and yuan by 2023. That's
a huge departure from the dollar.
Yeah.
So one strategy here could be to try to ease sanctions to create some distance between Russia and this axis.
Especially China.
Yeah. I mean, given Trump's stance towards Beijing, using these economic incentives to weaken that Russia-China link, that could be a key objective.
Yeah.
And Putin has hinted at possible partnerships in rare earth metals.
Yeah.
So it seems Russia's also looking at ways to leverage these relationships to their advantage.
Yeah, so it's this really complicated,
it's a real balancing act.
Yeah, you're reducing pressure on one side, hoping to make gains on the other, domestically.
Right, on the domestic front.
Yeah. It sounds like there's some political
consideration.
Yeah, that are kind of moving things towards this potential easing of sanctions.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of fatigue growing among Trump's base and his allies in Congress about the cost of this war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
We're talking over $100 billion in aid under Biden.
Wow.
Not to mention the economic hits that we've already talked about.
Right. So could lifting sanctions be like a victory lap for the administration?
Yeah.
Like, we ended this costly war. We're bringing down pricing.
And shift focus
Yeah, and then they can
to
turn,
the domestic issues.
yeah, immigration and eliminate with their base.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly a plausible narrative.
Yeah. But
It's not going to be a smooth ride.
No.
There's going to be pushback.
From the hardliners in the Republican Party,
Yeah.
people like Secretary of State Rubio.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was just in February
Uh,
assuring European allies that the sanctions were going to stay until there was a resolution in Ukraine.
so there's definitely a split
Oh, yeah.
within the Republican Party on this. And then, of course, there are...
Illegal constraints.
It's not like Trump can just, snap his fingers and say, okay.
Exactly.
Oh.
He doesn't have unilateral power here.
Yeah.
The 2017 Countering America's Adversaries through Sanctions Act, CATESA,
Yeah.
requires congressional approval
Okay.
for lifting some of the key measures,
Yeah.
particularly those targeting big Russian firms like Gazprom Neft.
So there's this real...
So they have to navigate those legal hurdles
Yeah.
and potentially try to get Congress on board.
Yeah. So it's this whole...
But a real tightrope walk.
Yeah, you've got this, this desire to change policy. You've got the political climate at home,
Mm-hmm.
and then this existing legal framework.
Right.
So we've talked a lot about, the factors that could lead to lifting sanctions.
Right.
What about like the downsides? What are the risks?
Well, that's a good question. What message are we sending
Yeah.
if we ease up on the sanctions without Russia making some major concessions?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, are we essentially rewarding Putin for his aggression?
Yeah.
I mean, would that damage America's standing in the world?
Right.
The Atlantic Council put out a report in February
Mm-hmm.
that warned against lifting sanctions too soon,
Yeah.
saying it could make us look weak
Yeah.
to other potential adversaries.
And then, of course, there's this whole debate about how effective sanctions actually are.
Yeah, and that's been going on for a while now.
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely hurt Russia's growth potential.
Ah.
I mean, it's estimated at about 20% since 2014, and there's been a brain drain.
Right, people leaving Russia.
Yeah, but they've
Oh, yes,
adapted.
they have.
They've created that shadow fleet to get around the oil restrictions,
Mhm.
and they've shifted to non-Western trading partners.
They have.
So it really shows you that, just trying to punish them,
Mm-hmm.
it's got its limits.
Right.
The U.S. might be realizing that keeping the sanctions in place
Mm-hmm.
might not be doing much
If Russia can keep the war going.
if they can just keep going.
Right. And while, their trade with China and India has increased a lot,
Mm-hmm.
it seems they're having to sell at a discount.
Okay.
And there are logistical problems and payment issues.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's all smooth sailing for them.
Yeah.
The sanctions are still having an effect.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just-
not been a total blockade.
It's not a complete shutdown. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's this real...
It's a real cost-benefit analysis,
Yeah.
both in the short term and the long term.
Yeah. So where does all this leave us right now?
Well, this is a key moment, it seems. Biden's last push for sanctions back in January.
Hmm.
The ones that targeted the oil sector even
Right.
more
Yeah.
might have actually given Trump a stronger hand in any negotiations.
Yeah.
Because now he's got more leverage.
Okay.
But the question is, how will he use it?
Yeah.
Will he try to get major concessions from Russia on Ukraine?
Right.
Or will he just try to get this over with quickly,
Yeah.
even if it means a bad deal for Ukraine?
And those talks that he had with Putin back in February,
Right?
those were, lengthy and productive.
Well, they call them lengthy and highly productive.
Yeah. But they were pretty secretive.
Very opaque.
Yeah. So we're left to wonder what his objectives really are.
Exactly.
Is it about a ceasefire? Is it about, getting energy? Is it about some kind of bigger...
Geopolitical.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So the lack of transparency makes it really hard to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like this whole idea of the U.S. easing sanctions on Russia, it's being driven by a whole bunch of things.
A lot of factors.
Yeah, we've got this, ongoing stalemate in Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
the real economic pressures,
Yeah.
both globally and here at home,
Uh-huh.
especially energy and food.
Right.
This aim to kind of reshape the global power dynamics, maybe weaken that Russia, China, Iran.
Right. Try to break up that block
Yeah, and of course, the political situation here in the U.S.
domestically. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
And as we've discussed,
It's really,
there are good arguments on both sides.
yeah, there are.
Yeah, should we keep the sanctions? Should we lift them?
And there's disagreement within the government and
Yeah.
among the U.S.'s allies
And its potential.
about what to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and bringing Russia back into SWIFT is
Oh, yeah. That's
yeah, it's a big deal.
that's a major consideration.
Because that's the main system that banks use
Right.
for international transfers.
It's the plumbing of global finance.
Yeah, so this isn't just, theoretical for people listening.
Yeah.
This decision,
It has real-world consequences.
yeah, it affects global markets, gas prices, grocery prices.
Mm.
And so it really makes you think,
Yeah.
What are the parts of the shift that are really worrying?
Right.
And what are the parts that may be
Or could be good.
potential benefits? Yeah.
Yeah, so here's a thought to kind of end on.
Okay.
I mean, Russia has shown that they're really good at adapting
Yeah.
to sanctions.
Very adaptable.
Yeah, they find ways around them.
Yeah.
So does that mean that maybe the sanctions haven't really worked?
Mm.
Or is this just a smart move
I see.
to engage with Russia in a different way?
A pragmatic shift.
Yeah, and in this whole complex situation.
Yeah. How do you even define
What does success even look like?
success? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
That's a real question.